from our team. And yes, my name is Susan Abisher, and I have a warm welcome to Jeff Cumps. You are a co-founder of Eileen. You are author of Sociocracy, the novel, Sociocracy 3.0, the novel. And when I look at your profile, you have a long experience in accompanying organizations and with new forms of management. We, from the NextGen Enterprise Summit, we're glad having the topic Sociocracy 3.0 today on schedule. So Jeff, maybe you want to share with us a bit, where are you coming from? What is your background?
First unmuting myself. Hey, hello everyone. Welcome in this session. I'm really happy to be here. I'm seeing some familiar faces from Belgium, but lots of faces from around the world I don't know. So good to meet you in this way. Where am I from? I'm from Belgium, born here, living here. I'm having a family here with 2 kids, 7 and 9. I was just saying, Susan, it's kind of weird to at one moment being here at home doing homework with my daughter, and then 5 minutes later being on a call with Susan to prepare for this talk with you guys. I think it's part of working from home. Cool. So yeah. I'm from Belgium. Anything else you'd like to know, Susan?
Oh yes. So like professionally, what were your different stops or stops that have marked you especially?
Okay. Without going into too much detail, I was educated as an engineer. So all into rational mechanics and electronics and software stuff. But then by building software, that was the first part of my career, building software. I accidentally stumbled in a Scrum team, which is a small self-organizing team, as my first job, let's say, which was really cool because it was an awesome team. We were building awesome products close to the customers, building valuable things. So I liked working. And then things changed and I became a consultant. And only then I realized that the work life and big enterprises were totally different from the focused team atmosphere I've been in. And that's where I kind of made it unconsciously at that point in time, but I kind of made it my mission to change the world of work, or help change it, and try to have as many teams and organizations experience this, let's say, connection and focus and dynamics I experienced myself in that first team. So that's why I became an agile coach and later on an organizational coach.
And what brought you to Sociocracy?
Well, actually, I was with a colleague on a conference, and there was a guy called James Priest who was coming to talk about something very, very new he was creating. It was one of the first times James was talking about Sociocracy 3.0, and I was immediately hooked, became good friends with James, fell in love with Sociocracy 3.0, and started supporting James in spreading it, and also spreading it and implementing it in Belgium in our own organization first and at clients. And that's where the journey started. And that's around 4 or 5 years ago.
Just for your info, James just connected.
Yeah.
Great. Hi, James. Good you're here. Yeah.
So we have a lot of interested people in Sociocracy and quite some specialists in this call with James Priest, Sheila Mearson, that will be our guest next Tuesday, and you, Jeff. So I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe I can just share 2 sentences about what we planned for this session today. So we will dive into Sociocracy and the topic, which is what are the reasons for success of Sociocracy 3.0 implementations. So we're really looking for these success gold nuggets. That's the aim of our session. And we will work with Mentimeter in between. Jeff will be showing the link to ask you some questions, and we want to make it an interactive session. And you will have the opportunity to ask your questions later on, and depending on how many questions we have here on the plate, we will either have a debate in the plenary, or if there are less questions, we suggest to have an exchange in a breakout room. So we will actually be very agile with you all guys today and see on how things are going. And yes, so I want to make the link back to the topic, reasons for the success or failure in sociocracy. Jeff, the entrance is yours.
Okay, let me share some slides with you guys then. So now you're seeing my title slide if everything is going well, right?
Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
Great. I'm also keeping open the chat. So if there's questions that are really urgent, that are about what I'm talking about, and you need to have the answer to be able to follow, then throw them in the chat. If I see them, I'll answer. So Susan is going to help me out. And we're going to address more questions later on, right? So when Susan and Luke asked me to talk about the success factors of S3, I kind of translated it to what, according to me, are the strengths. And those strengths I've seen become success factors at either ourselves or clients, starting with implementing S3 patterns. So that's the way I'm approaching this. I'm going to give a brief introduction of what S3 is, although this session is not dedicated to trying to explain that fully to you guys. But by touching on some of these strengths, you're going to get more insight into what S3 is all about, probably or hopefully leading to some good questions afterwards. So that's kind of the aim of this session. As a lead-in, something not only I, but all of us see happening in the world is that it's changing faster. Things are being discovered and changing really fast. Projects, organizations become more complex. Complex as in harder to predict, even impossible to predict. So we need different approaches. But also people seeking different things in their work life. If I compare myself with my father and even how my son is looking at work, we and the younger generations even more seek different things in work life, more meaning, being more contributing, but also getting more autonomy. So I think organizations need to adapt. And what I see happening in the world is that organizations are trying and learning how to become more adaptive, more agile, learning organizations that adapt itself from within. But also keep on delivering and even becoming better at delivering the right products and services and also delivering them fast. So shorter time to markets is an aim or an objective and a challenge of many organizations. Often self-organizing teams, so small self-organizing teams are one of the building blocks of these kinds of organizations, which help to put people in their center, in their talent, and make sure that people are engaged and can maximally contribute to the organization, but also benefit from that themselves in the sense of growth and well-being. And finally, I think organizations are more and more aware of their need or the Earth's need, let's say, for organization making a valuable contribution to our society and even the planet. So this is kind of the approach I'm taking, or how I look at things, and where I fit S3 as one of the instruments to help address these challenges.
May I ask you a question about learning organizations that adapt itself from within? What is the way on this adaptation from within happens from your perspective?
Well, basically, instead of having a reorganization pushed down from the top, if I exaggerate a little bit, but only a little bit, every 4 or 5 years because of an organization becoming out of date with a fixed, stable, rigid structure. So instead of forcing a big change every 4 or 5 years, I think the question now is how could we adapt a little bit each day to assure that every day we change as an organization to become more aligned with what's needed, to be better able to address the current questions or requirements or challenges. And I also think that we need to learn how to do that from within. So not from the top down or from one isolated ivory tower process department, but that every person, every team, every group of people or department can change its own structure, even governance, the way they do things. So that's what I mean with a learning organization.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right. It's a great question to lead to a question I have for all of you, because if you would think about these great or large reorganizations that a lot of organizations are going through, becoming more adaptive, becoming more agile, becoming more fluid organizations, more participatory organizations, or growing towards self-management, then the question I'd have is, why do these reorganizations not always, but very often fail or are really hard? And I'd like you all to go to Mentimeter, which is an online polling tool. You could see the link here, or using your mobile phone, you could simply scan the QR code on this slide. And then I'll give you a couple of moments to answer the question. You could submit several answers if you see more than one reason. So go ahead.
So I think the trick as well for those who don't use QR codes is going to www.menti.com and then using the number that is there, 8975936.
Yes, indeed.
And we are extremely curious to read your comments.
Assuming that most of you have found the link and the code, I'm gonna stop sharing my slides and show you your own results or answers to the question. So now you see some of your answers scrolling by. I'm not going to be able or even willing to read all of them, so I'll leave you reading some. I'll pick out a few that take my attention. Someone saying reorganization not coming from within is what we were just talking about.
And underestimating how long it takes, that seems really being myself in organizational change.
Yeah,
there is a lot of illusion on how fast it can go, but that very often it takes like 2 years, 3 years until something is like solidified. I don't know what your experience is.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that culture is not changed overnight. Definitely not. Also, someone saying about underestimating the mind shift. So it's not only about changing structures and processes, but also culture and principles and the mindset of people. So it requires individual internal change as well.
Yeah.
Lack of vision. I like that one as well.
And mandated from above, like what do you think about that? If it's mandated from above?
Yeah, definitely. I translate mandate then as active support, as some kind of guidance or leadership from above, definitely. Yeah. Change is always complicated, someone says. It makes me smile because I read that as change is always complex. Complex meaning unpredictable. So we need to find out how to change as we go.
I see the question. I define myself as a manager. What is my utility now?
Yes, definitely. Great question. So what happens with all these middle managers or team lead roles? And how do those change or are affected? That's definitely a valid question. Yeah. Okay, I see some great answers. So keeping these answers in mind is a good thing to do while we go through the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing. Later on, I'll make sure to share all the answers with you guys if you would like to read through them. So together with the slides, I'll also share your Mentimeter answers.
Wonderful.
Great.
Thanks a lot for being so actively participating.
Yeah, definitely.
To all of you.
Okay, good. You're seeing the slides again if everything's right.
Yes.
Great. Let me very briefly introduce Sociocracy 3.0, and then I'll highlight some of the strengths that I've seen or experienced. as a way to deepen understanding of what is Sociocracy 3.0, but also why can it help you address the challenges you've just been listing in the Mentimeter poll. So Sociocracy 3.0 is a social technology for more agile and resilient organizations, or you could say to unlock the potential of both people and the organization. For me, that's a different way of saying that. And what is a social technology? Well, it's a technology, but not about IT or software or tools or these kind of things. It's a way, or it's about people collaborating. So about how do we organize ourselves? How do we collaborate? How do we decide things? So it's about that. And so Sociocracy 3.0 is not a methodology or a full-blown package you need to implement, but it's a set of proven patterns you could go and apply. What's its origin? I want to say something about that briefly for people to know the sources, to go and find out more. One of the big sources, or one of the two main sources of Sociocracy 3.0 is classic sociocracy, which is the Sociocratic Circle organization method, which is a method that has originated from the Netherlands in the 70s, which answered the question, how could we govern ourselves in an organization in equivalence? And it still exists, and sociocracy is kind of derived out of that or built on that, together with, and that's something a lot of you will be more familiar with, I guess, with agile and lean product development. So the agile, what's the word? The agile way of doing things in the software world, but also lean product development, those principles are also inherently part of Sociocracy 3.0. And it's James Priest who's here. So James, if you want to jump in and add on to things, feel free. So it's James Priest together with Bernard Bockelbrink, a German person that have co-created S3. They came together and they combined all their wisdom and experience into Sociocracy 3.0. And then soon after, Lily David joined, and together they're the co-creators of Sociocracy 3.0. So this is some of the history which you might dive into if you want to find out more. Some attributes of Sociocracy 3.0 to define it. Well, first of all, it's free. James, Bernard, and Lily have decided to kind of openly and freely share it to the world in a Creative Commons license. That means you need to attribute, but you could freely use S3 and create new stuff based on it as long as you use the same license on that. It's based on 7 very strong principles. We don't have time to dig into all of these principles, but they form some kind of foundation, but also glue between all the patterns and the techniques from S3, and they mutually reinforce the patterns. So that's important to notice. And also important is that S3 is a modular system. That's what I meant when I said it's a social technology. It's a gathering or a collection of patterns. It's not one big methodology, but you could consider it as a box full of Lego bricks. And you could just take out any Lego brick that suits you in that moment, in your context, to address some kind of challenge or need.
So you're just saying the strength is using the bricks when you need it at that precise moment and from where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's also why I listed this as the first strength. So this is repeating what I just said, but it's not a prescriptive toolbox or methodology. It's a box, you could say, or a collection or a gathering full of Lego blocks. That's a metaphor I'd use. You could also use the metaphor of a menu of things you could choose from. But it's a collection of 75 very practical patterns. And a pattern is a little process that's useful, or a technique or a concept or a definition you could use. All right.
Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah, sure.
If you say that it's Lego bricks, do you feel like that there are bricks that are really interlinked, like pulling out a net of like a net of things where if you take one brick, somehow you need another brick linked to it? Or like, would you say you can use it really just one brick out of it?
I would say that whenever you pull out one of the patterns or a brick, it's going to invite you to also investigate some others, but definitely not all of them. It's not that they're all attached to each other, and at the moment you pull out one, all the others need to follow. Definitely not. But experimenting with one or two patterns is going to probably lead you to a couple of others. Yes. Yeah. So the patterns are reinforcing each other in that way, but they are pretty independent of each other as well. So some of the patterns are key, and I'm going to list one of them soon. So that's a concept actually that you're going to use a lot, which is drivers, and describing drivers would be the pattern. That's a pattern you would use a lot. But some of the patterns, hopefully you'd never use because you'd never need them, right? So it's a non-prescriptive toolbox. One of these patterns is a driver. I think what's so valuable about these patterns and the whole of S3 is that it's always starting from what is your specific situation in this moment in time. And it's asking these two questions: what's happening and what's needed currently in your organization, in your team, in your specific situation. And if you describe these two things briefly, then you would be describing what we would call a driver. And a driver is the reason for acting or reacting in a certain situation. And describing a driver is a key pattern in S3, and it helps us to always remind or always remember to start from the why, and never go into some experiment or some strategy or changing something about structure or decision making without knowing why. So these are two very important questions at the core or the heart of S3 for me. Mm. And it also links to the question we had before about why do these reorganizations fail? Because I see a lot of reorganizations where self-management or agile or lean or whatever is the goal and not the instrument. And so if you would pull in S3 patterns, then you would ask yourself this question: what's happening and what's needed? And then you would find out, oh, we need to become agile. And then the driver template would ask you, good, but why? What's the impact or the effect of becoming more agile? So that's for me one of the strengths of S3, that it's always asking the why question in many ways and forms.
And starting from where you are currently.
Yes.
Not just saying, okay, now we need to do lean, and then you just go through the whole organization and you do lean from A to Z, but really saying, okay, what do we want to solve? Why are we doing it? Take that as a strong base.
Yeah, I agree.
And taking from where you stand, I think that's a big difference to other toolboxes, if you want.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. A phrase I learned from James is that meet people where they are, and that's what S3 does. It meets teams and organizations where they are at that point in time. Yeah.
Beautiful.
For me, another strength is that in a way S3 supports the whole organization. Let me put a disclaimer next to this. It doesn't provide you patterns and tools for all aspects of all kinds of organizations, but it does support big parts of an organization, and also many organizations or kinds of organization. I've been working with small startups, with non-profit organizations, but also some of the larger banks in Belgium are using S3. So it's really applicable to many kinds of organization and covers, let's say, big parts of what is happening in an organization. And typically we could look at an organization having these 4 dimensions, and in each dimension, S3 is providing us with some patterns or techniques or processes or things to get to work with. One is the adaptive organizational structure I was talking about before. So we need to learn to adapt every day instead of doing big reorganizations. So that's where some patterns are provided for. There's also patterns around effective decision-making, consent decision-making, to name it, and I'm going to link to that later again. There's also patterns about collaboration and growth of people. How can we learn to better collaborate, to become more artful in collaboration, etc. And there's also patterns, and these are typically patterns borrowed from more agile and lean frameworks, let's say, patterns about maximal value creation. So how do we get to work? How do we organize our work, make sure we could deliver great results? So that's what the patterns are about. This is a high-level overview of all the patterns. So you could see 75 patterns grouped into a bunch of collections or groups, let's say. I'm not going to read through these, but just so you know, oh, there's a lot of patterns. This is a screenshot from the Sociocracy website. So I leave it to you to go there if you want to investigate further. For me, the third strength of Sociocracy 3.0 is that it's inherently agile. And we could write agile with capital A and without capital A in this sentence. I doubted when writing this. It could be agile with a capital A, linking to the Agile Manifesto from the Agile software development world, which says that we should always put people before processes, meaning that we should adapt our processes and tools to support people in their work. And that's what S3 is really doing, but also continuously learning and evolving and building the right products for customers. And that's also built into Sociocracy 3.0. And it's, in my opinion, one of the stronger aspects of it, that it's continuously asking the question, what we're currently doing doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to fit for the next 5 or 10 years, but it needs to be good enough for now and safe enough to try. So that's a question we're always asking. Is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? And it links to Agile because of its iterative and incremental nature of continuously learning and evolving and incrementally growing things.
So it's really about looking for the next step in things.
Yeah, definitely.
Not doing the whole engineering process of going through everything, but really implementing by incremental small steps, changing.
Yes. Yeah. And at the same time, making sure that any next step we take is good enough for now and feels safe enough to try and to go on with, right? So we don't do any unsafe stuff. It needs to be good enough. And at the same time, we don't need to overanalyze and plan to make it perfect because the world is ever changing. We'll need to adapt all the time.
Like inherent in this safe enough to try is that you can come back to a decision, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. Yeah. And for instance, one of the patterns of S3 is about making and evolving agreements, which is going to invite you to, whenever you make an agreement, always put an evaluation date or frequency on it and the criteria to which you will evaluate it. So making already visible and showing that the agreement is going to have to be evolved and changed over time. Yeah.
But this is really a huge change to what we have learned in management trainings years ago. Like to 5-year plans, to make decisions that have to be so thorough that everything is safe for the whole life.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So we're no longer carving agreements in stone for 50 years. But on the other hand, we do need to document them. So that's also important to always be clear on what are the current agreements and store them in what S3 would call a logbook. So a clear documented space for all the current agreements.
So it is about as well about making things specific. If I don't hear you, making things specific, documenting the progress, and like to make clear until when do we want to maintain this maximum, and the moment when you come back to it, and the documentation and transparency about it seems to be very key in that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And that's what I want to zoom into a little bit, even in the decision-making aspects or parts of S3, consent decision-making, this agility, this continuously learning and adapting is built in. The question we're asking there is whether there's any objections to a proposal. And an objection is a reason why that proposal would lead to unintended consequences, maybe damage or harm being done, or a reason why the proposal would miss out a worthwhile improvement. And instead of having endless discussions, consensus conversations about what the perfect solution would be, we're starting from a proposal and we're finding whether or not this proposal is good enough, whether or not there's any objections. So even in decision making, this good enough for now is really important, to continuously seek for a good enough agreement. If there's no more objections, we go on with it. We go ahead and we learn. And maybe tomorrow the agreement is no longer good enough and we adapt. And then someone might raise an objection. So that's one of the examples, let's say, of how this agility is built in. All right, so that's about good enough for now and safe enough to try. For me, another strength of Sociocracy 3.0 is that it transcends and includes. And for me, that also links to what I've said before about meeting people and organizations where they are. So it's not about considering something as bad and something else as good. And a phrase we use often is that it's not either or, it's both and more. So it's not about calling one thing bad and the other thing good. It's finding the best out of all things and always trusting that there is this both and more solution or approach or strategy. And to give you an example, I've heard many opinions and discussions also at our clients of let's get rid of this hierarchical organizational structure we've known for so many years, and let's go and evolve to a flat organization, and people thinking that a flat organization is good and a hierarchy is bad. And I think one of the strengths of S3 is that it provides options, because that's what it is, to build an organizational structure that combines both, that finds that both and more solutions. So that's one of the aspects of S3 I want to zoom into with this strength. And so this would be a visual, simplified version of an organizational structure in which you still see some hierarchy, right? But the Ds, the strange D symbols, would be drivers. So it would be goals you want to reach, challenges you're addressing. And there's a relation between all these goals in an organization. So instead of having a flat organization without any structure, we do have structure, because structures brings clarity. It provides focus. We're all centered around the same primary driver, as we would call it, the big D in the middle. So structure is good. Structure might have too many drawbacks and shadow sides when it becomes a structure of people that have power. But this is a structure of goals wanted to be met or reached. And so this structure provides clarity, focus, but also shows us who's doing what, where, who's responsible for what. And then S3 is providing patterns to have people take responsibility for those goals or those drivers within clear domains, we would call that. And that's the circles you would see there. That's a circle. The circle with the dots is the visual symbol, let's say, of a circle, which is a small self-governing and self-organizing team taking responsibility for one of these drivers. The little heads there would be roles. So circles and roles are two very basic building blocks, let's say, for organizational structure, together with the domains, which is the playing field these people step into. And for me, it's one of the example of finding the both and more between freedom for people to move in the organization where they can maximally benefit, but also learn and grow. So this autonomy, this freedom, allowing innovation and engagement, but on the other hand, clear structure, so we know we're all working towards that primary goal of an organization.
Jeff, I lately had in a accompaniment of a company the question raising, saying, okay, that's all wonderful, having autonomy and responsibility, but how is it about like salary shift? If I need to take more responsibility, what is happening to the salaries? Like, is that a reaction that you are facing too?
Yeah, definitely. It's a common question, and we would consider it a common driver that's being described in an organization. So typically when people start experimenting with these roles and these circles or self-organizing teams, and people being in different roles, or maybe one or two teams and several roles, combining stuff, then these tensions, that's what we would call a tension, which is a neutral word, would pop up, and people would ask these questions. And I think the good thing about S3 is it doesn't have one answer, like you need to do salaries in this way. But it helps you to formulate the driver and to say, okay, what's happening and what's needed. And it provides ways such as how to co-create a proposal, and then helps you to find an agreement on that using consent decision making, right?
So it's providing the way. It's not like sociocracy that is giving the solution and that's how you do it.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. Which is, I think, one of its strengths as in, instead of providing very ready-made answers, it's learning us to think and reflect for ourselves more. Yeah. So that was about, it's not either or, it's both and more. There could be more strengths listed, of course, but I want to finish off my list with the one I think is most important, also for me personally. And it is that S3 brings you, both as an organization, but especially as an individual or a person, it brings you where the real change needs to happen, which is inside of ourselves. That's where I think the greatest field of exploration and experimentation lies, because if we change as either natural or hierarchical leaders in an organization, if we change on our inside, the way we think, the way we act, then we're going to be able to have impact on organizations. And there's lots to say about this, but for me, the 75 patterns are great things. They're practical, proven techniques. They're visible, let's say. But all these patterns in a way invite you to look inside and to look inwards into yourself, but also into how is our team dynamics, what are we doing within our team. So all these patterns have one or another way to reflect about that. And I think that's really powerful. I consider S3 having many layers, and maybe the top layer are the visible patterns, but the layer below that is self-reflection about, wait a minute, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And one question that we typically ask, which is one pattern, and a really important pattern, which is called Artful Participation, which is directly asking this question. So the question would be, is my behavior in this very moment the greatest contribution I can make to the effectiveness of this collaboration? So this is one of the 75 patterns. It's instead of having a little door to self-reflection, this is a door to self-reflection at itself. Because if you would ask yourself this question 10 times a day or 15 times a day, your thinking would change, you would become more self-aware, your behavior would change, and that would have impact on your team and organization. And it becomes really powerful if you do this with your team and you together commit on trying to be as artful as possible, and also holding yourselves and your teammates accountable for that. So that's a small but really powerful pattern.
And are you using that like in a sequence of a meeting, or like what would you suggest a company say of artful participation? Like you just said, it's good to ask this question several times a day.
Yeah.
That you become more
Yeah,
self-aware.
I think that would be my first suggestion, to individually and personally go and experiment with this. And then as a next step, tell your team you're doing this. Like, hey, I want to be as artful as possible, and that means that I want to try to maximally contribute, both serving me and you as a team. So please give me some feedback, or ask, or maybe I could ask for help. Another thing we help teams to do is together commit on this and translate that to what that means. And for instance, it could mean that they regularly check in with each other about artful participation, or like in our team, it becomes vocabulary. And when I do something that a colleague of mine finds a little strange or not so artful, it just asks, hey, Jeff, how is this artful? And because of this collective commitment to trying to be as artful as possible, it's not attacking me. It's just pressing the pause button and having me reflect, wait a minute, what was I doing? Why was I doing this? Am I contributing? Is this artful? So it's this continuous self-reflection that is triggered by this question. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I just get a question of a participant that fits well, I think, from Bansi Shah. Who asks, are there any prerequisites, maturity criteria? So when we're talking about individuals and how mature they are, it's about like the individuals, but as well about the organization. Is there any criteria of maturity before you can attempt like doing a pilot of sociocracy?
In general, I would say no, in the sense that based on what you're currently facing as challenges or desires or goals, you could always go and see whether any of the 75 patterns would help you with doing so. Yeah. So there's no prerequisites on that level for me. No,
and it's not choosing from the menu. It's really like, okay, asking why, or what are you needing, and like what is giving an answer from.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course it helps if you know more of the 75 patterns, so that you can more consciously pick a pattern or decide whether a pattern is even going to help. So you need to find out more, but it's not that you need to have certain experiences or much more knowledge or certain maturity to start with some of the patterns. Like anyone could describe a driver. If I ask my 7-year-old girl, like, what was happening? Okay, and what is it you need? All right, and if that would be done, then what would the impact be? Then I'm helping her to describe a driver without even telling so, right? So.
And so it's about having people asking these questions so that so even within teams that people are like starting to just ask questions so that people can reflect.
Well, that's one part of it. For instance, formulating a driver or describing a driver is going to ask you these questions. If you want to clarify domains, like what's the playing field of a team, there's a series of other questions that S3 is proposing. So there's a lot of, for me at least, the patterns are triggering a lot of reflection, but also bringing the clarity by documenting things and by formulating them together, describing them. Brings a lot of clarity. Yeah.
And do you think that is there, so in this question I just got, like there was as well the part of organizational maturity. So you are saying this is well valid for organizations. You don't need a special degree of maturity to start with S3.
No, I don't think so. No. I have some customers who are really, let's say, hierarchical organizations, very rigid, and they benefit from S3 patterns. And there's other customers that are really, let's say, people-oriented, very few structures, lots of consensus talking, and they're also using S3. And the first company I have in mind is using S3 to become a little bit more agile and take more care of its people. And the second company I was thinking about is using the same S3 patterns to become a bit more results oriented and speed up instead of slow down. So that's for me the strength of S3. It really meets people and organizations where they are. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. This was also the end of my list. Be the change you wish to see in the world is for me a good summary of the spirit of S3, because as you've heard me explaining, it's a lot about becoming aware of what we're doing and why we're doing things so that we can become more of ourselves and more in our talent and be more of a leader. So now I'm curious what your questions are and whether and how many questions there are, so we could either decide to keep on doing questions or go to a little exercise we have in mind. So we have a Mentimeter set up for that. I'm gonna go and make sure you can see the right question.
So it's the same link, huh? If I'm not
So
wrong.
if you would go to the very same link as before, then you would now see a new question asking what your question is. So you would be able to bring in some questions right now. Is that true?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, great.
So I think everybody, you can go back again on menti.com using the same number, or you're still logged in.
Simply refresh your screen maybe.
And it asks you, the presenter has changed the slide. Do you want to go to it? And you need to click yes. So just feel free to write any question you have.
I will share your questions so you could see what questions are already asked, avoiding any unnecessary duplicates this way.
Francois, you were asking about the code. You just see it on the top. It's menti.com and the code is 897593.6. You're welcome. Thanks for your chat messages. So feel free to ask your questions. And yeah, maybe while you can still enter your questions. You were talking about the strengths of sociocracy. And if you needed to say, like, what is the main reason for success? Is it this flexibility in taking what is needed at the moment and at the same time in different teams they can choose whatever they need, focusing on what's the why, the driver, so the problem they want to solve, and getting an answer. Is that like, what is for you the main reason for success in implementation of sociocracy?
Yeah, well, I think I have a kind of a double-sided answer on that, in the sense that I think that as a world, we're looking for instruments such as S3. We're kind of ready for this. Organizations and people and teams are asking these questions on how could we become more effective? How could we become more agile? And I think S3 was born at the right time, let's say, but also from the right spirit. And that's what you've just said. It doesn't provide a fully detailed, concrete answer or a roadmap to what you should do. No, it makes you think, and it provides 75 useful techniques and patterns you could use. So it's the optionality of S3 that if I hear reactions of our own customers, that has kind of convinced them initially to start with it. It's easy to get started with. And at the same time, it's very concrete. It gives concrete tools and instruments to get started. So yeah.
So we're getting a lot of questions coming in, and
Yeah.
since you're at the steering wheel with the Mentimeter, I suggest that you're picking the questions to answer. And I think, yes, show like seeing this, and if you feel like you want to get some precision from somebody, I
We
think
could always
well
ask, right?
involved
Yeah.
audience.
Okay, and seeing so many questions, I think the proposal would be to go on with answering the questions for around 10 minutes instead of doing the exercise. Would that be okay for you, Susan?
Yeah. So if anybody has an objection, write it now into the chat. Would that cause harm if we went on answering questions? But yes, please. So what's the question we want to pick first?
Okay, and help me pick out the most important questions in your sense, Susan, because there's a lot of them. The question right in front of me is, how easy is it to train people in these techniques? Does it require a lot of time to learn? I think I could briefly and quickly answer this. So it doesn't take a lot of time, but you do need to learn something. So typically, I've been doing half-day courses on the essentials of consent decision-making, and that allow teams to go ahead and learn and experiment with that. So starting from a half-day onwards, I see people really starting experiments successfully and learning and growing. We also have done a lot of what we're calling S3 practitioner courses, which were initially designed by James and Lily. And that's a 3-day course covering around 60 out of 75 patterns, so that you kind of like know the whole collection and can start implementing them. So that would be the quick answer to that question.
I just see that Axel Zimmer, he was raising his hand, and it seems like he has a really burning one.
Okay.
Yeah.
That you please, you can, yes, Axel.
Thank you. Just a quick comment. I mean, you can really teach people 75 specific practices in 3 days, and then leave them on their own, and they can do it. I mean, that sounds really optimistic, because just decision making by consent takes, takes a while to learn. So
yeah, definitely. And you could spend 3 days only on qualifying objections and consent decision making. I agree. So in these 3 days, we out of these 75 patterns, we touch upon 60, and we learn and practice with people around 20 to 25 of the most important and most commonly used patterns, right? So and in my experience, that's enough to get started. But are you an expert in consent decision making after this course? No. And I think no course can ever do that. I think you need some introduction, and then you need to practice, and then you need to continuously reflect and search for feedback on your practice. I think that's the better way to learn than only being in a training course. Yeah. So connect with peers, with other practitioners, practice, get feedback. That would be also good ways to learn and evolve.
Yeah. I see another one, which is very interesting: how to start in big organizations by department, by site, by transversal
Yeah.
purposes?
Yeah, great
About
question.
100,000 people working for that company.
Yeah.
What is your tip?
Well, I would definitely recommend to not start learning S3 with all 100,000 people together. I would definitely not do that. I would try to... Sorry?
So is there somebody that wants to add something to the question? No, otherwise I think it's a mic that is not.
Okay, yeah.
Just go ahead.
So for me, the question is, where's the tension? And with tension, I mean, where is one or more people needing something, wanting something, desiring something for which they need help? It could be that they struggle with decision making, which is either going too fast or too slow, or they struggle with giving people autonomy and delegating work decently. So that's always the question, like, what's the need of the team or the organization right now? And the question I would ask even before that is why. Whenever a client approaches us and tells me, Jeff, you need to help us implement S3, I would say, great, but why? And then without even explaining, I'm asking for the driver of starting to implement S3 patterns. So that's kind of always the first pattern I introduce is describing drivers to understand why is it you would want to start using Sociocracy 3.0. And answering that why question is sometimes easy, but sometimes not. But it's always a good foundation to then decide, is S3 even gonna help you? And if so, what patterns and where and how? And so that's the main starting point, let's say.
That links to another question. You said that you shared like the advantages of S3 and where are the limits. So like if you are asking the why and say, is S3 the solution? What were things or examples you faced where you saw actually it's not S3 solving it?
That's a good question.
So you shared the advantages of S3, but
yeah.
what are the limits is the question.
What's the limits? I remember one situation where people wanted things like really fast, really concrete, really clear, and for them S3 was too much of a meta framework. And they were looking for someone just giving them answers. And I'm personally having a more coaching attitude, and I'm asking more questions and I'm giving answers. And for me, that's also a bit part of the spirit in S3. So I'm not saying that's a limit of S3, but I remember those people turning away from S3 because of not wanting to reflect. They just wanted answers. So that's the first situation that pops to mind. I also remember another really large organization in Belgium that was having a really, what's the word in English, traditional culture, hierarchy, kind of a power hierarchy, but a very traditional conservative culture. And they decided to, in a 500 people department, to do an overnight change, well prepared, but overnight change. And they consciously didn't choose for S3, but for Holacracy to be able to upfront design everything. And then on Monday morning, start with 500 people in, let's say, a newly defined organization. And I think because of their culture at that point in time, I think that was the better decision. It fitted better with their culture at that point in time than incrementally experimenting and growing. And the interesting thing is that they did this, and then 2 or 3 years later, when everyone's behavior had changed, then people started to question things, and there were tensions popping up and some critical voices, and that's where they pulled in S3 patterns to navigate from that, let's say, that big turnover, and then they navigated complexity further using S3.
So it's about like being impatient or like wanting really answers and
I wouldn't frame it that way. I was just mentioning 2 specific situations in which I found that a righteous choice, but I wouldn't generalize. Yeah.
So it's not it's really a question about why and
yeah.
that there is a limit, and if you are in this situation, is not ready.
Well,
but now, like the readiness to go on that way and reflect
Yeah, I think that might be a limit. If you say I want to change my organization and the way I run my team, or I'm part of a team, but I don't want to self-reflect and I don't want to become more aware of things within myself and others, then S3 is not going to help you, I think, or it's only going to be superficial, maybe. Yeah.
So, what else do we have here?
I see. How do you recommend approaching and prioritizing those 75 recipes or patterns in the toolbox? I think that is answered by the driver, as in what's happening and what's needed. So let these two questions show you which of the patterns are more important for you. Yeah.
I'm just reading James Priest. He commented that he is listening to us and wanted to let us know about Sociocracy 3.0 online learning community that is starting. Maybe, James, if you want to say one sentence about it.
Yeah, that would be cool.
So that would be really wonderful. If you can, though, being with your family.
Hi there.
Hi, James. Welcome.
Hey, good to see you. Great presentation, Jeff. So clear. I really enjoyed listening. And with
Thanks.
family, we're all listening to you here. Yeah, so the S3 online learning community, we use a platform called Mighty Networks, and we've got about 500 people joined there since December. There's, like any community these days, there's spurts and dips in communication, but there's quite a lot of interactions and helpful articles and so on there. So if you want to join, it's free to join and you're very welcome. You'll find it via the Sociocracy 30 website. And Jeff, I don't know, maybe you were going to mention it, so I don't want to kind of jump the gun, but there's also the Common Sense Framework, which you will find mentioned in the Sociocracy 30 website as well, which is a new framework we put together last year precisely to answer that question about how and where to start. So maybe you folks would find that useful as well. And I don't want to take up any more time, so I'm going to hand back to you, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, James.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
It's good you're here and to hear your voice. And what James was talking about, I have on the last slide a bunch of links to further learn. So when I distribute the slides, the links will be in there. So,
which is wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
So we're slowly but surely coming to an end. And I asked the audience, is there somebody who wants to ask a really burning last question that has not been answered yet? If yes, please feel free to unmute your mic.
I see the question, could you give some examples of company of a certain size using S3? Maybe that's a good one to answer. For instance, we're working with a 200 people nonprofit organization doing S3. There's also a big bank in Belgium who has an 800 people department actively using S3, and they've put some S3 principles and parts in the, let's say, the company-wide roadmap, which is thousands of people. There's also smaller startups of 5 to 20. Sorry,
could
Susan?
Could you share the name of the bank, Jeff?
It's KBC Bank who are formally doing this, and they're also talking about it. But 2 weeks ago, I was having a talk at BNP Paribas Fortis about S3 as well. So there's experiments. What are other large organizations?
We have in the audience 2 people from the Banque Alternative Suisse that have started doing pilots in Sociocracy.
Ah, great.
I would like to greet them as well, especially with us. So yeah, there we had, I was part of talks as well with the limitations of banks and questioning whether Sociocracy would really be able, like, would that fit with the limitations a bank have? But seemingly in Belgium, a huge bank has implemented Sociocracy.
Yeah.
So perfect. Yes.
I'd like to pull out one question. Someone says, you say the patterns are like Lego bricks, so that means they can also be implemented wrong, like putting a yellow brick where there needs to be a blue one. And I would say, yes, of course. So with let's say, bad intentions, you could abuse S3 to do bad things, yes. So S3 is not going to magically solve that, but it does going to invite you to be more transparent and invite to openly share what the intentions or reasons are. So I think that links back to one of the strengths we mentioned.
Yes, so
All
we're
right.
coming to an end, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
What is your last wish? So if it is about sociocracy implementations, what are you asking us to consider, maybe as your last statement today?
Okay, great question. Let me share a slide with you about that. So this is the list of learning resources. There's the book I wrote, which is a novel of a company introducing S3 and learning how it works. There's the S3 website and the online learning community James mentioned, and the company I'm part of, which is Eileen in Belgium. We're also organizing courses and events. But to answer Susan's question, it's to be the change ourselves. And we all dedicate that quote to Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world. But apparently this is what he really said. I only recently discovered. And he said, we but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. So as a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is you could not choose a better closing of that. I'd like to close the session today by pointing to our next Tuesday's Thriving session, where we actually have a comparison between holacracy and sociocracy. Sheila, she is with us today. She will be one of the speakers, and Anna Macrat. So we are sticking with the topic, and feel free to register today.
Suzanne, it's in 2 weeks, I think.
Thank you.
Oh,
that's it.
That's
it's just 16.
2 weeks. I'm sorry. Thanks a lot. I was.
It's the next.
You, Sheila.
It's the next session, but it's in 2 weeks.
It's in 2 weeks.
Great.
That's right.
Thanks, Luc, and thanks, Sheila, for reacting on that. So feel free. I'm so impatient about it. I wanted it to be next week. So it's in 2 weeks. Feel free to register, and we will have a very interesting exchange on like what are differences. And we already heard Jeff referring to a company that went with holacracy. First, it's a form of sociocracy. So that is really a very interesting follow-up of what we heard and talked about today. Luc, you have your hand raised. What I would like to say last, I would like to say thank you to our partners that are present today. It's Fabric, and today I saw it's Michael Drouard and Axel Zimmer that were with us, and it's thanks to them that we could actually organize these Thriving sessions for free of charge for you all. And as well, it's Hola Spirit. We have, I didn't see, oh yes, I had Joyce, I think that was around. So Hola Spirit as a second partner that makes it possible for all of us to join such wonderful sessions free for you in the audience. And yes, with this, I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. I would like to thank Jeff very much for being with us today. It was really very interesting. Thanks a lot to the NextGen team. Thanks a lot to Luc, to Nassim, to Mili. And before we are all leaving, to Miriam as well. She's a part of our team now. We are listening to some music, and I wish you a wonderful evening. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye everyone.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you.